Okay. Guten Morgen, willkommen to our German event today. My German is terrible, so I'll stop from really embarrassing myself. My name is Karen Gerwitz. I'm the president of the World Trade Center Denver, and we're so pleased to be partnering with the German American Chamber on this event. And I really am eager to learn a lot about this event. You know, I was looking back at some of Angela Merkel's quotes and some of her highlights. And, you know, she did mention that Americans, I'd say 1 in 5 are connected to the German ancestry. And I can say that that is true for me as well. So it's really important for us to learn about the political environment, political risk, political changes that could come about, especially after her longstanding career as chancellor. I would like to just welcome everyone here.
Karen, you're muted right now.
Thank you. Samantha Tillner is the new executive director for the German American Chamber of Commerce in Denver, Colorado. Welcome, Samantha. We're so glad to have you in this post. Samantha brings over 10 years of event experience, and they have a huge event coming up in December I'll let her tell you about. But she's also worked in Deutsche Messe, which we all know is one of the greatest trade shows in the world. And if you haven't been, you should. She's also worked in China, leading the Department of Affairs and events delegations for the Shanghai office of AHK Greater China. So you're in great hands with Samantha as the moderator for today's panel. She'll introduce our speaker, and we will be taking questions for the speaker. So I hope that you will add those into the chat and also just make your questions known so that we can get some audience interaction. But while our speaker is speaking, please keep yourself on mute. It's also very nice to see your video, so you can also turn your video on if you'd like, especially during the Q&A, so that our speaker can interact directly with you. It might be easiest while our speaker is speaking to put it on the speaker view as opposed to the gallery panel, and then maybe when we get to the Q&A, do the gallery panel so you can see everyone. So with that, I will turn it over to our partner in this, Samantha Tillner. Feel free to introduce yourself a little further and our speaker, and we look forward to your event in December.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, we're excited to be partnering with you on this topic. As you mentioned, I just joined the German American Chamber of Commerce about a month ago. I was working for the German Chamber Network before in Shanghai, and I'm originally from Hanover, Germany. So born and raised in the north of Germany, and I'm really happy to be, talking about this topic today, and really also kind of explaining, to the Denver business community how this could impact, the future of German-US trade, etc. So and as you mentioned, we do have a big event coming up. So just a side note that we will have the Denver Christkindl Market starting on the 19th of November in Civic Center Park. So we're really excited about that one. So that is just a quick side note. And generally, today we're speaking about the German elections, and they actually were held on the 6th of December. And so it's been a while. And so it's actually good to now kind of see where is the status of what's currently happening, which parties are involved, and when can we actually expect the government to be formed. And I'm really excited to have Tyson Barker on board for this. Tyson, I will give a quick introduction about your background. So Tyson joined the German Council on Foreign Relations in October 2020 as the head of the Technology and Global Affairs program. He previously also worked at Aspen Germany, where as deputy executive director and fellow, he was responsible for the Institute's digital and transatlantic programs. And prior to that, Barker served in numerous positions, including as senior advisor in the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs at the US State Department under the Obama administration, and also as a director for the transatlantic relations at the Bertelsmann Foundation. And he's written numerous articles for really great magazines like Foreign Affairs, Politico, The Atlantic, and also Der Spiegel, which is pretty known in Germany. So I'm really excited to have you on board as a speaker today, Tyson. And yeah, maybe if you want to say a few more words about yourself in the beginning, and then we'll dive into the first questions.
Thank you so much, Samantha, and thank you, Karen, for both of those introductions. And it's really a pleasure to be virtually in Colorado. As you mentioned, I used to work for Aspen, the Aspen Institute, and never got to make it to the actual Aspen, but that is still one of my big aspirations. So you have a lovely state, and really, I mean, even when you talk to people here in Germany, everybody knows Colorado, and just you see their eyes kind of glaze over the idea of beauty. I'm happy to just jump into a little bit of the election analysis just to start off with, and maybe tell a little bit of the story of this election. So obviously the big headline going into this was it's the end of an era. Merkel remains in power. She's been in power for 16 plus years. So an entire generation has been raised only knowing Merkel as chancellor. And I think that the world has become very used to having her on the world stage. Within the European Union, the 27 member states, she is the longest serving leader. She has outlasted 4 presidents in the United States, or she's had 4 presidents in the United States. I believe 4 French presidents, countless Italian prime ministers. The only people who can really say that they continue to see her on the summit circuit are Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan from Turkey, because they have a different role in their governments. But she has become quite a fixture, and that steady hand is something that I think that the world has somewhat, I wouldn't say taken for granted, but has assumed that it would be there. And now we're going into a new era. And there are a lot of questions of what that new era will look like.
Right.
But even here in Germany, just starting off that election cycle, the big question was who was going to succeed her within her party. And I think that this continues to resonate in Germany. So she is a member of the conservative Christian Democratic Party, a center-right party, perhaps used to be more, it's kind of like H.W. Bush style Republicans, conservative traditionalists, believers in institutions, liberal internationalists, free traders. And when she made the announcement that she was going to step down as party leader, the competition to succeed her was quite ferocious. It eventually led to her being succeeded by the woman who became her defense minister, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, who then was also subsequently forced to step down and then had another succession fight. And that fight was also quite contentious between a much more liberal, in the classical sense, small state liberal, cut your taxes liberal, Friedrich Merz, and a more centrist, I would call him a governor, they call them prime ministers here, the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, the largest state in Germany by far, Armin Laschet. And Laschet squeaked it out, barely won. There was another candidate, Norbert Röttgen, but he is not really, for this point, relevant. And so when Laschet went into this campaign, he really went into it with a divided party. And it was a party that was trying to find its way after 16 years of Merkel. And Merkel is quite unique in the Christian Democratic Party because the party is overwhelmingly male, the membership traditionally, overwhelmingly from West Germany, and overwhelmingly Catholic. And as we'll see when we look at the voting, overwhelmingly older. And of course, Merkel is a female Protestant from the East. So she's always been kind of an outsider, but after she left, or now that she's leaving, there was this desire to reorient the party perhaps either more towards its center-right roots or to continue with this central path. And they were never able to reconcile that. So that I think that says something about their eventual outcome. I don't know, would it help just to mention the actual outcome before I go into continue with the story?
I would say, I mean, this was a great, introduction for the elections and where we're coming from. I'm not sure if everyone in our audience is very familiar with the political system and the differences to the US. So if we could kind of, because you drew kind of a comparison to the Bush era and, the Democratic Union Party. So if we could line out a little bit the difference in the general system.
Happy to. So in the United States, we essentially have two parties. We have a federal system, 50 states, electoral college, all that. Germany works a presidential system with the Congress. Germany is also a federal state. It has 16 states. They call them Länder, but it has a parliamentary system. So the chancellor is essentially like a prime minister. And whereas we have two major parties, Germany has 7 parties that are worthy of note. So the largest party in the past has been Merkel's party. It's the center-right party, the Christian Democrats, as mentioned, tend to come from the West, tend to be Catholic, very prosperous party, the party of Helmut Kohl, the guy who reunified Germany, the party of Konrad Adenauer, the first post-war chancellor of Germany. A party that is conservative in every sense of the word. So when they ran for their very first election after the Second World War, the very first democratic election, they said their slogan was "No experiments," because obviously the dark period of the Nazi regime was seen obviously as reactionary experiment, and they wanted to really focus on just small iterative changes. And you see that in Merkel's style of government. The second major party in Germany is the center-left SPD, or Social Democrats. And they emerged, they actually are the oldest party in Germany with union roots. So this is the party of traditionally of labor. And they have put forth a lot of chancellors as well. Willy Brandt, who really kind of started the opening to Poland and the Soviet Union, Gerhard Schröder, who was the chancellor during the Iraq War, etc. These two parties have been what they call the Volkspartei and the People's Parties, the big tent parties. So they're the major center left and the major center right party for most of Germany's history. That's changing. We'll get to that. The third party are the Greens. And I think that they have become quite an object of fascination in Washington and elsewhere because they are visionaries. They're a little more bold than the Social Democrats or the Christian Democrats. They emerged out of the anti-nuclear and environmental movement of the late 1970s and early 80s. And they did quite well in this election. The fourth party are the liberals, the Free Democrats. And they are not the liberals in the sense that you would think of them in the United States. They believe in small state. They say the government should stay out of your bed and out of your wallet. So they want to cut taxes, they want to shrink the size of the social welfare state traditionally, but they also want to be civil libertarian. And that party is headed by a guy named Christian Lindner, a young man, young-ish, he's in his early 40s, who is looking he's part of the government negotiations and really wants to get a hold of the finance ministry. The fifth party is the Alternative for Germany, the Alternative für Deutschland. This is a new party, and it emerged a little bit like the Tea Party around the same time. So in the immediate post-financial crisis around 2011, 2012, as being anti-Germany bailing out profligate, what they saw as profligate European member states, so Greece, Italy, etc. So that was AFD 1.0. But then it slowly morphed into something a little more anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, a little more ethno-nationalist. And in that way, it kind of reflects the movement of the Republican Party or the Tea Party from, Tea Party affiliates very much focused on debt and the role of the state to something a little more ethno-nationalist and focused on immigration. Mm-hmm. And they have a great strength in Germany's east. And the final party, I should mention there's another small party with the CDU. There's a small party in Bavaria. It's called the Christian Socialist Party. It's essentially the same thing. You can think of it like this. Bavaria is kind of like the Texas of Germany. They kind of march to the beat of their own drum. They're also very conservative, and they have their own version of the Christian Democrats. They call them the CSU. And then the final party that is worth mentioning are the Linke, or the Left Party, which is essentially the successor party to the communists, particularly in East Germany. And their main strength is in the East. So those are the 7 parties. It's a parliamentary system. When people vote, and this time they voted by a great deal in contrast to the past by mail. You don't vote just for one candidate. You vote for a candidate in your constituency, just like we do in the United States. But you also vote for a party. So you have 2 votes. And you can give both of your votes to one, a candidate from a party and that same party in the party, what they call the lists, or you can split it. And that's how you get a composition in the parliament. There are 299 constituencies, but there are 736 seats in the parliament. So even though people are elected directly, the lists create the space because there are both first past the post representation through the direct election and proportional representation through the lists. And that's how you end up with smaller parties being part of the parliament. You wouldn't get these small parties like the Greens or the FDP or the AFD in many cases in parliament if you just had direct elections, because they wouldn't win. The 2 big parties would tend to win.
So
yeah, please.
Yeah, just on that note, I mean, you kind of explained that you vote for the party and also for a candidate, and that might be a good way to dive into the current elections. How did that look? What was the outcome? Were the party votes pretty similar to the candidate votes, or is there also a discrepancy in how the people vote?
Well, the party votes and the people tend to not split tickets. So the party votes and the direct election votes were similar, but the results skewed because the proportionate piece. So the way that this changed as opposed to 2017 is you had a small, in first place, the Social Democrats. They got 25.7% of the vote. And then right after them was the Christian Democrats with 24.1%. The Greens were in third with 14.8%. The Liberals were in fourth with 11.5%. The AFD was in fifth with 10.3%. And the left came in last of the major parties with 4.9%. Now, there is a rule in Germany that you can't enter the parliament if your party doesn't get over 5%. That is a holdover from the Nazi era because they didn't want to give oxygen to small parties that could then grow. But in this or fragment the party landscape too much so that certain parties could take advantage of the situation. But there is a clause that there's an exception if you get 3 directly elected members. And the left was able to get exactly 3 directly elected members from the East. So they will continue to enter into parliament. Where did the differences lie? Well, the most interesting split is not a gender split. it's actually a generational split. If you look at the votes of the youngest voters, those under 25, they voted preponderantly for the Greens and the Liberals. And the party that got the most votes from first-time voters, so those around 18 or 18 to 21, first time getting to the polls, were the Liberals, the party, the anti-tax party, the shrink the size of government party. They got the greatest share of the votes among first-time voters. That doesn't mean necessarily that that is reflected in the demography, because the average voting age in Germany is 58. It's a very old voting population. So voters over 58, actually voters over 60, tend to determine the outcome of elections. And they vote overwhelmingly for the two big parties, the CDU and the SPD. And there they voted more or less the same, but they definitely concentrated their votes in that area. One other interesting tidbit that I would flag is the AfD. Many people say that this ethno-nationalist party didn't do as well as it did in 2017, which is true. But it showed great strength in certain areas of the East, winning the majority of first direct mandates in the state of Saxony. That's a big deal. And they also have a lot of strength among young middle voters, so people between the ages of 30 and 45. It's a little different from what you would consider to be the same kind of voting population in the United States. So Trump and people who are adherents to Donald Trump tend to be older in certain areas of the population. Here, the median voting age for the AfD is actually younger. Mm-hmm. So I'll stop there. Maybe you have some.
Yeah, and I mean, the AfD, I think, is internationally known a little bit already because of those very far-right tendencies. Do you think this is going to grow in the future? And I mean, you mentioned that the majority of voters of the AfD are fairly young. So is it expected to grow the voters and the membership base? What's your take on that?
So it's hard to say. That'll be dependent on conditions in Germany. Right now, Germany is going through a very small but newly focused refugee crisis because Belarus, which has been massively sanctioned by the European Union, is retaliating by airlifting migrants from Iraq and Afghanistan and other states into Belarus and then letting them cross the border into the European Union over Poland with the expectation that they will go to Germany. So there's a lot of worry on the German-Polish border, which tends to be a stronghold for the AfD. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what happens. One thing of note is in Germany, trust in media as an institution is much higher than in the United States. So traditional state-run media, there's broadcast media like PBS in the United States. There are two big PBSs in Germany. One is called ZDF and one is called ARD, or the First Station. And older voters actually tend to get their news from them and from newspapers. But younger voters tend to get their information from social media, and it's much more atomized. So that's why you see a different information consumption behavior, and perhaps that plays a little bit into voting patterns. Mm-hmm. The other thing that it's worth noting is in Germany, like a lot of places, there has been a self-segregation in the population where a lot of people have left certain post-industrial areas, particularly in the East. So those who are still there are a different type of population than those who go to, say, Dresden or Leipzig in particular, the urban areas, which tend to be little green dots because they tend to vote for the Greens.
Well, and maybe now to really dive into what is your prediction, or who's currently speaking about forming a government? Which parties are involved? What are their major topics? What can we kind of expect in terms of a timeline when this government will form?
Well, it's worth saying that Angela Merkel, going into this election and continuous even to now, has I think a 75+% approval rating. It's definitely over 70%. She is universally regarded very highly. And so this election was kind of a mandate for who could be her most legitimate successor. Was it the man from her party, Armin Laschet, this mayor or this governor from North Rhine-Westphalia, or was it Olaf Scholz, who is currently in a coalition government with her as her finance minister? So was it the man from her party or the man from her government? That's what the claim was. And there was a turning point in this election. The polls were very much in flux, just all over the place. The Greens were on top at one point. The Christian Democrats were on top for a long time. It looked like it was just going to be another Christian Democratic turn. The turning point really was the floods in the Mosul region. There were some massive floods. Damage caused billions of dollars of damage. And the conversation in Germany turned very quickly to climate change and how climate change is impacting the German ecosystem and Germans' daily lives and livelihoods. There was also a moment, and I know Samantha knows it, where Armin Laschet, the chancellor candidate of the Christian Democrats, was caught on tape smiling and making jokes in the background of a very somber moment during the floods. And that image kind of stuck with him, that he lacked empathy for these people who had suffered. And that really really hurt his personal image. So that going into the election, a lot of people who voted for the Christian Democrats did so despite Laschet. And a lot of people who voted for the Social Democrats, and I'm mainly talking about older voters, did so because of Olaf Scholz, because they saw him as the man who had the temperament of Angela Merkel and a leadership instinct that was not revolutionary, but was very iterative, just like her, just moving very, very slowly, step by step. So now we're on the other side of the election. Olaf Scholz was somewhat vindicated, even though he wasn't his party's chair. And he is currently trying to form a coalition with the Liberals and with the Greens in what they call a traffic light coalition. And I read a great quote on Twitter right after the election. It said, "There's nothing that Germans fear or respect more than the traffic light." And I think that's I think that's kind of true. And in this way, I think that the German population is kind of excited about this because it's the first time that there will be three parties in a coalition. And it's a tempered dynamic where you have the Social Democrats, which are, again, not very revolutionary, very iterative. But then you have the Liberals and the Greens who want to make big changes. And they are currently in the middle of a very complex negotiation, but their outward optic is one of unity. I can go into the negotiations if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to kind of dive into the question of what role does foreign policy and, the economic outlook mean. I mean, you kind of mentioned it, we saw that during the climate conference right now, and also during the G20 in Rome, that climate change is a big topic. And I feel like this has been also like one of the major topics during the elections and now during the negotiations for the government. And the question, or to ask, a little bit provocative, is this government looking more at, the climate change aspect, social responsibility, and less at economic development and foreign policy?
Ooh, that's tough. I mean, it's really one of the toughest sticking points in this government because the Greens are coming in and they want to create a ministry of transformation. And they want that ministry to be focused on hitting sustainability goals and really to try to increase, to speed up, accelerate sustainability goals. Or putting that at the hierarchy of objectives at the top. So, and they are pitted really strongly against the FDP, who has some very hard red lines, the Liberals. They do not want to raise taxes. They do not want to increase government spending. Specifically, They do not want to break the balanced budget amendment in Germany. It's called the debt brake, which doesn't allow more than 0.35% of deficit spending in Germany. It's kind of a sacred plank for a lot of Germans, but particularly for the liberals. And they're going to be more skeptical of industrial policy. So that is the central tension in these negotiations right now. But they have made certain agreements already. They all agree that they should be on track to meet the Paris goals of Germany not contributing to increasing global warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030. They have all said that Germany should end the use of coal ideally. Now that's a little bit of a fudge, but in the initial coalition paper, which was released about 2 weeks ago, they said they want to end the use of coal in Germany by 2030. Now that's very difficult for Germany right now because, of course, Germany has already phased out nuclear energy. So they phased out nuclear energy and now they're phasing out coal, which means that they're reliable on two sources of energy, renewables and natural and gas, which means a greater reliance on Russia. Of course, has a geopolitical dimension, one of which we are experiencing right now in Germany as gas prices are going through the roof. They have also said that they want to eliminate the production of combustible engine automobiles by 2035. So already in the very first agreement between these coalition partners, there have been some targets on the climate side. On the fiscal side, the FDP the liberals have gotten a couple of points under their belt as well. They have gotten agreement for no new taxes on income. They've gotten agreement on no new types of asset taxes. And they've gotten agreement to stick to the debt brake. So already we're seeing that the space for action is very constrained, because there's not going to be very much money there. And I think that the expectation right now in Germany is there's going to be a massive withdrawal of fiscal stimulus and fiscal consolidation in the next couple of years, no matter what. So the kind of big stimulus experience that we had during COVID, the COVID rescue packages, the next gen EU 750 billion at the European level that Merkel and Macron negotiated last year, and Merkel said it's a one-off. I think that now it will definitely be a one-off, because I don't think that the FDP would be on board for another massive stimulus.
Mm-hmm. So that sounds a little bit like most what they're negotiating right now, and what the main topics are kind of inward looking and domestic policies. Have there been any, mention of, let's say, the Russia and China relations, or, transatlantic relations, or has that been kind of put on the side to get to once they figure out the domestic issues?
Well, like everywhere, and I think like the United States, foreign policy is a secondary priority. The negotiation, the partners in the coalition negotiation released a 12-page paper, as I mentioned, a framework paper about 2 weeks ago, and it included 10 areas of negotiation. The first area was reforming the modern state and digitization. So that's a real big priority for Germany right now, because German industry is going through a transformation from something that's much more industrial based, internal combustion engine, lots of precision manufacturing, supply chains based on engineering, all this kind of stuff, to something that's going to be much more IoT related, robotics, systems driven, that kind of thing. So they're thinking about how the state needs to participate in that transformation. So regulation needs to change, the way regulation is done, the speed of the state, speed of regulation, that whole process. That's the first thing that they mentioned. And that includes things like, especially, and you know this, Samantha, covering gaps in digital infrastructure in Germany, which has been a perennial problem for years and years and years. And there's reasons for this. I hope nobody hears from Deutsche Telekom, but Deutsche Telekom bears a lot of responsibility for that because of some poor decisions that they made about 10 years ago. On the foreign policy front, I mean, the biggest area that the Germans are really looking at is climate change. And the Germans will be taking over the G7 presidency next year, worth flagging.
Mhm.
I can tell you that they were not impressed by the British G7 presidency this year, which they said was a little schizophrenic. A lot of topics, just everything thrown up against the wall. Already the government has flagged 4 issues to deal with in the next G7 presidency. And this is the Merkel government. And bracketing that out, that gives you a sense of the consistency. I mean, we saw it over the weekend when Merkel and Schulz were meeting with leaders of the G20 together. But there's going to be a lot of consistency in policy between the Merkel and the Schulz government. This is not transition from Obama to Trump to Biden, where everything is like going, U-turns all over the place.
Right.
So the 4 areas that they flagged are pandemic recovery, climate, infrastructure, global infrastructure, and particularly connectivity infrastructure, and a global compact with Africa. And those are the 4 areas that they would like to focus on: relations with Russia, China, transatlantic relations. The initial inclination with all these parties, especially the Greens and the SPD, is to focus on Europe. Investing in strategic autonomy, investing in digital sovereignty, deepening the European cohesion, which is very much in question right now in certain member states. With regard to the United States, there are mixed feelings. All 3 of the parties have Atlanticists, and all 3 of the parties have skeptics of the United States. And that skepticism goes in areas from democracy to big tech, to previous engagements the U.S. has had in places like Afghanistan, etc. But I think that the tone will be consistent with the Merkel government, holding the line on NATO membership, remaining in NATO, which was a topic in this election. Whether or not Germany should withdraw from NATO. That's a topic for the left mainly, but it was mentioned. I do think that there is some discussion here in Berlin about defense spending and decreasing or maintaining defense spending where it is. The current defense minister just announced an increase of troop levels in Germany by 20,000. I think that the next government will want to look at that and see if they really want to move in that direction. So I don't know. It's hard to say where this will go. The Biden administration has been extremely generous in its negotiating position with Germany and Europe on everything from Boeing Airbus to global minimum tax rates to 232 tariffs to, of course, the decision not to enforce sanctions on Nord Stream 2. So I think that the Biden administration will be looking for a little bit of goodwill from the next government, and rightly so. On Russia and China, again, the picture is somewhat mixed. The SPD, the Social Democrats, have a traditionally very strong, the connective tissue between the Social Democrats and the Kremlin is quite strong. They were the purveyors of Ostpolitik. They've always had a stronger relationship with Russia. Former members of the SPD, including Gerhard Schröder, sit on the board of Nord Stream 2 and Rosneft. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline docks in a state governed by the SPD in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. So they are going to have, I think they're going to be, that party is going to be more Russophilic than Merkel, who was for Germany quite Russo-skeptic. But the other 2 parties, the Liberals and the Greens, are much more democracy hawks, are much more about independent institutions, and will be more strident in calling out Russia and China on human rights abuses, on oppression of minorities, and on their behavior globally. And in fact, Annalena Baerbock, the lead candidate from the Greens, already said just this week that she thought that Nord Stream 2 was illegal. So that tension remains.
Yeah, and I mean, you said Biden will be looking for goodwill from Germany a little bit, and we already saw that, he's cut the steel and aluminum tariffs, which was a great development for German businesses, that, you know, the trade with the United States will be a little bit easier here in the following month. I would like to mention just to our audience, if you have questions, feel free to post them now in the chat box, or also, you know, unmute yourself and chime in. Both is okay. Otherwise, I've already received a couple of questions, so I might just continue with that, but please feel free to ask Tyson any questions now. So one of the questions that came up beforehand was, you know, how about the respect for the new government in Germany? You know, you said approval rate of 75% for Mama Merkel, which is, I mean, something that people dream of here. So that is a really, you know, you can see there's a lot of support in the government currently. Do you think this will continue, or will the skepticism for a new government in Germany also rise a little bit? Because, I mean, Germans are pretty trusting in their government historically. Do you think this will change? Because we see that in other countries internationally, that just, you know, the pushback, and you said it, the media plays a big role, just, you know, questioning a lot of things that are happening. Do you think the approval ratings will be as good?
So let me start with the bigger frame, which is trust in institutions. And trust in institutions in Germany, by and large, remains extremely high. There's not the skepticism that we see. Yes, there are elements of, you know, people who are skeptical about vaccines, or skeptical about the government's, what it's saying about infection rates, or skeptical about immigration policy, all these areas, but the trust in institutions remains high. And I'll give you one example. There was an attempt, and this is something that the German Cybersecurity Agency was watching in advance of the election. There was some attempts to start a discourse online about, in the German word is Wahlbetrug, or voter fraud. And in fact, on election night, some of the AfD candidates floated the idea that there might be voter fraud in Germany, kind of taking a page from narratives that have played out in the United States. And it just never took off. It never gained traction in any real meaningful way in the German population. I would also say that in advance of the election, votes between the Social Democrats and Christian Democrats were quite close, but the favorability rating for the next chancellor was overwhelmingly for Olaf Scholz. So the fact that he is indeed becoming the next chancellor is seen as a fulfillment of the will of the German voter. And to that extent, I think he will come into office with a great deal of goodwill. Now, what kind of chancellor he will be, I can't tell you. I mean, I don't know, you know, if he will be beloved, or, you know, he'll make some missteps and then, you know, he will not be as well liked, but he is seen as a steady hand. The other thing I would say is there was a really tough coalition negotiation in 2017 and 2018. And I won't get into the messiness of it. But these three parties have said they don't want to repeat those mistakes. And because of that, not only have they been showing unity outwardly, but they've been very quick in moving to set up 22 working groups to establish policies. There are 300 negotiators right now here in Berlin negotiating the policy for this coalition agreement. They've been given 3 weeks to do it. And they've been given the 22 working groups, each one has been given so many pages that they can write, 3 pages for some, 5 pages for others. And the goal is to have that entire process finished by December 6th, so that Olaf Scholz can be sworn in as chancellor, or voted in as chancellor, in early December. That's very fast in recent German history. Yeah.
Well, let's hope that can actually happen. I received one other question. So, I mean, there was, you know, the minimum taxation was decided, sort of, and also that means for some US companies doing business in Germany that there will be a higher taxation. Do you know, I mean, that's obviously more for the digital companies, but is there any tips you have for, businesses, US businesses that are doing business with Germany or in Germany that they should prepare for the next year, and any changes that you see for them in 2022?
I mean, definitely continue to watch the debate around the carbon border adjustment mechanism, carbon border tax, which will play out at the European Union level, but Germany will be probably the decisive voice on minimum corporate tax. As you all may or may not know, Germany was one of the only states in Europe that did not support a DST. There are reasons for that related to its own revenue streams outside of Germany, and how they calculated their own revenues for public coffers. Watch for new projects which have already been budgeted for, major projects on supply chain areas, on the innovation industrial base in Germany that might include US companies. So areas like semiconductor manufacturing, things like quantum computing, artificial intelligence, things that require a lot of hardware that your US companies can be involved in. But also watch for Germany and Europe to be coming to the United States and saying, how can we be involved in your industrial policy projects like the CHIPS Act in the United States? Let's see, also a lot of new R&D money. Again, there is a lot of money already pre-budgeted that will now be programmed in batteries, hydrogen, like I said, chips, cloud, that American companies can and should participate in, as long as I think that there needs to be reciprocity. And that's going to be a big part of the debate in these coalitions. To what extent should we allow, frankly, American companies to be involved? Because Americans have such a strong position in the tech sector. And how much should it just be Europeans?
Okay, yeah. And maybe this might be more of a personal question going into, how long have you lived in Germany now?
I've been here since 2016. And I was a foreign exchange student here in 2001.
Right, yeah. And has, living and working in the political field in Germany, has that kind of, change your perspective on how the political systems, and kind of, have you seen some things that you were seeing that you miss in the German system, or you say, they're really, they should be missing in the US system, kind of, has that changed a little bit for you personally?
I would say that the German system is a lot more sober. It's somewhat, sometimes anesthetizing. There's not a capital placed on charisma. Merkel and Scholz are both known for being not super charismatic. They're kind of doting technocrats. And that plays out in the every aspect of politics here. It's just it's much more baseline. It doesn't have the kind of entertainment value that US politics has, for good or for bad. You're never really emotionally driven by the characters in politics for the most part. There's not the fear, and there's not the inspiration. It's something much more staid.
It's a little bit more dull, if you can say that, but yeah, generally.
Definitely.
And I being here now for a year, people have asked me well, who are the candidates for the German elections? They asked me very early on this year, and I was like, it's not clear yet. And, their programs for the election will probably be revealed a couple of months before the election. And I think that, roots in the different funding systems for Germany. But also I'm wondering, is that an advantage or a disadvantage? Are we not informed long enough in advance in Germany, or does it actually bring the political campaign to the point?
I think Americans would prefer a little break from around the clock all the time campaign cycle. That's my personal opinion. I'm a political junkie and I get sick of it. The other thing is that parties play a much bigger role in Germany than they do in the United States. Although I guess it's kind of changing. It's more about tribalism in the United States, but really, those top candidates, you're talking about them as individuals. And here you're really talking about the parties. And as you said, the party platform plays a big role. That doesn't play any role in the US. There was a party platform of the Democrats. The Republicans this last time didn't issue a party platform because they said, what's the point? So that kind of party-centric piece is missing from the United States, primarily because the US directly elects everybody. In Germany, you have lists. So in order to get a high place on your list, you have to be favored by the party, not by the voters.
Right. True. Yeah. I actually got another question here. Could you comment on the trends on private healthcare, how that will play out in Germany? Or if there's any change in the healthcare system. I mean, there's a very different healthcare system, but the question is, is there a trend to private healthcare?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, that is way outside my area of expertise. As you might know more about this than I do. I mean, as you know, the private healthcare system is pretty minor in Germany. It's mainly public insurance, AOK. And it's all kind of wrapped up in your taxes and the way the government handles the public option, I guess, or I don't know, public healthcare. There's not been any push. That was not a campaign issue in this election at all.
I would probably say, if we're looking at a coalition with the SPD, the Social Democratic Party, there's not going to be much change in that system. So I would also see that, the social healthcare system in Germany will be pretty stable, and that's not something that anyone's looking to change. I hope that kind of answers the question. And are there any other questions? Now would be the time. We have 7 minutes left. Otherwise, I don't see any other questions. Tyson, is there anything you want to get off your chest about about the elections or any of the topics?
Well, I mean, I guess one final point, maybe I mentioned this, but is the SPD, as I mentioned, very iterative, it was kind of a sleeper party. They were for a long time, they were in third place in the election and kind of came from behind and took it. But the two big issues that they ran on are, one is a raising of the minimum wage to 12 euros an hour, and that they're dead set on that will happen. And the other is related to housing. There is a big housing crisis in Germany right now, and there is a desire to really, really expand the housing market. So that's definitely something to watch, because I think that's where you'll see a lot of growth next year.
Okay, so and there would be a lot of potential for foreign investment, I guess, in those areas then as well. Of
course.
Yeah. Okay.
Germany's also as just like the United States in a lot of places, but I think even more so than the US, massive real estate asset bubble, boom. I don't know. Housing prices have gone through the roof in Germany.
Yeah, and you see that here as well. And I mean, there's always the discussion if there's going to be a burst of the bubble or not. But that's probably something we should watch in either country. Okay, yeah, and I don't see any other questions. So I would say from my end, this was really informative, and thank you for sharing your insights. And I think you're like the perfect candidate to kind of, talk about this, because you are from the US, but you've lived there so much, you work in the political field. And I would say, you are on LinkedIn. Anyone that is like really interested and would like to reach out, I think can find you or reach out to the German Council on Foreign Affairs. And thank you very much for spending the time with us and sharing everything, and really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
There's one more question. Let me read just since we how do you explain the seriousness of Germans with the popularity, with the raves in the youth? Yeah.
Well, I think you're mainly talking about, I mean, okay, maybe this is a little exaggerated, but I think you're mainly talking about Berlin. And Berlin is kind of not, I mean, it's in Germany, but it's not really Germany anymore. Berlin is quite unique in Germany for many reasons, and one of them is this rave culture. The other thing is that the city is, I mean, there are a lot of areas of Germany that are poorly run, but Berlin is notorious for poor management, for being bankrupt, for being poor but sexy. That's just part of Berlin's charm.
And I would say actually, I mean, because it does dominate though the news, and you know, like you see more about the raves here than you see about the rest, for example. So definitely I can see how that would be, you know, something that people associate with the German, you know, political environment. But I would say the seriousness in German's political system is still probably weighing out those raves. It just gets more attention for sure. Yeah,
Exactly.
perfect. Yeah, thanks for the question. And yeah, there was just some links shared also in the chat. If you have further questions, read out to us, to the World Trade Center, and also to the German Chamber. And Tyson, again, thank you very much for joining, and have a great rest of your evening. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Tyson.
Everybody. That was fantastic. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.